We're live.
We are live. Welcome to my kitchen again. Took a couple of days off because making kyphi the old-fashioned way is a very time-consuming and exhausting prospect. I hope everybody had a lovely weekend. It is Tuesday. Is it Tuesday?
No, it's Wednesday
Oh, it's
now.
Wednesday. Time has no meaning anymore. It's really hard to keep track of. I really thought today was Tuesday. Okay, well, so it's Wednesday. Hi. So a little bit more than a weekend and change. If you happen to live in any of the places that are experiencing flooding in Ohio and Michigan, particularly, stay safe, look out for one another, do your best. I know, like, this is the absolute worst time for additional natural disasters, but those are the times we live in right now. So look out for one another, take care of one another, and keep an eye on the news just in case things go sideways in your particular area. Don't worry about us. Everything's really wet here, but we're safe so far. So,
Yeah.
when last we met, I had completed the long and somewhat arduous process of creating kapet or kyphi, which is ancient Egyptian temple incense. I was working off of the recipe as it appears on the walls of the temple complex at Edfu, because that, of all of the recipes that have come down to us over the ages, is the one that pretty reliably has measurements. And that's fairly important for anything that is scent based, well, really any cooking thing. Like, you need to know, do you need 5 cups of flour or only one? Your end
Mm.
product will be quite different depending. And in the case of kyphi, do you want a cup of frankincense or only a tablespoon? End result will be quite different. The batch of kyphi that you watched me make over the course of nearly a dozen days is currently at Inspiration House curing. The one thing that we learned is this home is just a little damper, and so it extends how long it takes for the kyphi to cure. Uh, so the kyphi will be curing in the display room at Inspiration House, hanging out with all the ghosts, the creepy music boxes, the dolls that I've collected that Illyria cannot stand. Uh, yeah,
Dolls. Question:
yeah,
Will we be making pre-orders available for this batch of
yes.
Kifi?
One of the things that I want to do, and we'll probably do some of it today, is get a sense of like how many balls get rolled up for different things. I'm looking into some different packaging options. Currently, I've been working with little tins that honestly are from like Michael's Craft that are sold for wedding favors. They made it look fancy and whatnot. I don't know how sustainable they are. They're just little metal tins, but I'm looking into a couple of eco-friendly companies that make boxes and shipping stuff specifically for cosmetics, which would make them about the right size. They also allow for some printing options, so we might have some neat little things to like recognize the different types of kyphi. I'm thinking of them as vintages because the kyphi that I made in June of 2019 is different in some respects. I mean, not so different that they're not the same thing, but there are layers to the scent that are a little sweeter and a little earthier than the current one. Now, it remains to be seen if that is a matter of it aging. I will say that what I remember it smelling like last year when I just finished and what this current batch smells like this year, subtle differences. Not, oh my God, it's going to ruin it. Actually, just like different vintages of wine, slight differences in where the ingredients were sourced from. In the case of the current kyphi, a significant difference in the base. Uh, the original recipe at the Temple of Edfu, everybody translates the fruit base to raisins. Last year, I second guessed that based on some descriptions in that text of how you handled that fruit. Now we know with industrial farming, and just the amount of time between us and back then, many plants have become different. We have different varieties. And so, most of our grapes are now seedless. That's not how grapes naturally started. Grapes should have seeds. That is how plants propagate. They, they get pollinated, they make fruit, the fruit has the seeds, and, that makes more plants. So this is relevant to dates versus grapes for this reason. In one of the texts that comes down to us, they talk about how you are supposed to prepare the word that is translated as raisin. And it specifically is talking, cut them open, stone them, as in take a pit out, and then wash the inside of the fruit before you chop it up and macerate it and soak it in the wine. I don't know about you, but none of the grapes, even the seeded grapes that I've worked with, have seeds that are so big that I could think of them as pits or stones, or that upon opening them, there would be one and only one that you would scoop out, and then you would have the interior flesh to wash. Sounded a lot more like dates to me, which in that time period, in that region, dates were very plentiful. With changes in climate, grapes are less likely to be grown in the Egyptian region currently, but it was different back in the day. So actually they were known for grapes and for wine. So the question remains, is it a translation where raisin is kind of like a blanket term for any dried fruit? Because that comes up when we're talking about frankincense, because incense is in the word. Frankincense just means high quality incense. That's where the word comes from. And when you go back to the early Egyptian stuff, there's times where it just says incense, and we presume that they mean frankincense there. Later we know that they must mean frankincense when they're saying that, because it was so widely used. Repeatedly, frankincense and myrrh both come up as sacred luxuries and things that are used and burned in the temples as well as in magic. So anyway, that's a very, very long ramble that takes us to the point that last year's batch had a fruit base of exclusively medjool dates, and this year's vintage of kyphi has a base of organic flame raisins. So there's subtleties that are different from that base and how that kind of like allowed the other scents to build. The other notable difference in that is that the raisin base is already much less sticky and gummy and much easier to roll up and turn into little kyphi balls and little kyphi pellets. That is how you prepare this incense before you burn it. Now, with the most recent batch, I used up all of my myrrh, which meant I needed to make a new order.
Dun, dun, dun.
Ta-da! So this is from Wild Tree Essentials, and I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to sort of like see why I keep going with this company, even though like this is high-end stuff. I'm gonna lay stuff out in a minute. So you probably don't want to see my address. Well, I mean you might, but please don't. Okay. All right. So this is how our stuff shows up from Wild Tree. All right, and in this order, there will be honey, hojari, frankincense, honey variety as opposed to the mahogany gold. Can you smell? You can smell it already, like right?
Yeah, the smell just reached over here. Oh my gosh!
It's full of all the resinoids and things that like. So the higher end resins and gums are. There's a couple that I don't buy because they're usually used just to produce the essential oil because they're so high in the oil. And for what we're doing with them, we don't need something like that is that saturated. But these are still incredibly rich, and just you open it up and it's amazing. So we've got a couple of varieties of frankincense in here, and Arab myrrh, which is the highest quality of Arab myrrh. These each are a pound bag. Here is the myrrh. The myrrh actually in this case was our most expensive thing. There's a bunch of different varieties of myrrh. I'm going to pull out something. This is called Camophora whitey, Nagar Google, or Mukul myrrh. Google gum is another word for it. Guggul, not google.com. And to give you an idea, this is from the same species of tree, but it's a slightly different variety. And that's going to be something that that holds true across the board. So there's different types of myrrh and different sources for myrrh. So this is Google gum. It's much stickier. You can't necessarily tell, but like the whole thing in here is just one big clump. And all of these are resins that weep from trees, usually in little cuts in the tree that go down to the sapwood, and it drips down. If you've ever been around a pine, any dent or nick or cut in a pine, just like all of this resiny sap comes out and covers it. It's basically a scab for a tree. It's preventing more things from getting into the tree, getting deeper into the tree, burrowing and whatnot. And it's part of the healing process of the tree. So this is Google gum, and this will be Arabian myrrh. I believe that this one is from Yemen. Doesn't say on the label anymore. Okay.
I'm not sure which Etsy store we mentioned, but do you remember, was there an Etsy store that we had mentioned in one of the previous live streams? Someone is saying they're having trouble finding it.
Oh. Mermaid Magical Arts, which wasn't an Etsy store.
That might be why.
I think they might have an Etsy store, but I found them through just their straight up website. And it's mermaid, but not spelled like mermaid, M-A-D-E. So Mermaid Magical Arts is one of the places that I've been sourcing. This is a place called Wild Tree Essentials, but be aware, I mean, all things considered, so this is more expensive, but a pound of, what was the pound of Arabian? A pound of Arabian myrrh was, okay, the Arabian myrrh is not cheap. Close to $80. So we're looking at stuff that is, I think one of these types of frankincense was like $5.50 an ounce. And so, you know, for a pound, multiply that by 16 and you get what you get. So one of the things about the Arabian myrrh, I don't know if you can see in this, it has an almost dark honey or peachy color to it, whereas this is much more kind of a muddy brown. But the most notable difference in this case is this one has a sweet and peppery scent, which it then will lend to everything that you use it for. And the Arabian myrrh is not necessarily a scent you would think of as, oh, I love this. Maybe it's bitter, it's sharp, it's very resiny. It's got an underbite that some people liken to licorice or anise. I don't quite get the same, like I can kind of see where people make that assumption, but it's its own thing. It retains all of those layers of flavor and sharpness on the tongue because this is edible. It's actually used as a medicine. It's used in a number of toothpastes, cosmetics, things like that. It is known to have antibacterial, antifungal, and a number of other properties. There's some current suggestion about like the application of the oils of frankincense and myrrh, particularly with cancer, but I'm going to warn people that I have only started to see that added as we think it's anti-cancer. I have seen absolutely no scientific study on that currently, nothing that I would trust. So as much as you might see people saying that, oh, this is great for, like, you know, helping with your cancer, what I'm going to say is it is antibacterial, it is antifungal, it smells good, it lifts your spirits. So burning it in your house, it's been used as a cleansing purgative for thousands of years. So it would be not a terrible thing to have to just help you meditate. One thing that we know in cancer treatments is attitude goes a long way for your immune system and to boost and to kind of help you just endure. And so I'm not going to say that it has a darn thing to do with cancer cells themselves, but I will say if you want to use it as a supplemental thing to just burn some to feel better in spirit while you are also fighting the battle for your body. That's about as far as I would endorse that. Anyway.
There's a question about whether we could show people how to use the Bakur burner to burn.
Oh,
which I think is a great idea,
Yeah.
especially because that whole step with like adding tinfoil
Yeah,
is
yeah.
really difficult to describe.
Yeah, so actually I happen to have one of the Bakur burners from Adder Mist. So Bakur burners come in a couple of different varieties. There's one that is not electric. It comes with you can put charcoal in it, and you've got like a little place where the charcoal goes and stuff goes over the charcoal. I do not have one of those, so I can't demonstrate the best way to do that. What I'm going to strongly suggest is your goal with this, in any variety of way that you're burning your kyphi, is you just do not want it directly on the charcoal. Kyphi, agar wood or aloes wood, Bakur incense, and several other like ancient world inspired incenses, things that have like really come up to us from long and old tradition, are not meant to be lit on fire and burnt. You know, we talk about burning them, but it's more about warming them intensely. So that's something to think about.
Oh, goodness.
That almost hit Illyria right on the head.
Yes, it did. In fact, it did hit me on the head, but it's very, very light. So
well, because I caught it as
no
it
harm
brushed
done.
your hair. Okay.
The swiftness of the reflexes is legend. Sorry about that, everyone. I was trying to make room to plug in the Bakur burner over here, for which I had to unplug the thing that our perhaps somewhat precarious setup I was resting on.
I mean, it works, but
does.
it can't really be bumped around too much.
Nope.
Okay. So actually, let me move a couple of these things, like the Google gum, which I'm gonna chuck back in here.
Okay, very carefully knocking around by plugs. Okay.
Things that I'm really happy about that I hadn't like realized was making sure we had a plug on that side of the kitchen island. I mean, it made sense for a mixer back in the day. All right, so here, I got it,
Cool.
is my Bakur burner, which I think I'm going to move this over so it's easier to see. So it's not just like on the black surface. Oh.
The formerly black, now slightly dusty surface.
Oh, wow, no, it's...
Myrrh dust!
Yep, it is covered in myrrh and frankincense dust.
Not a problem.
I hope you don't mind that the kitchen's going to smell and taste like this for a while.
No, I don't.
It's a good thing it's non-toxic.
Also, apparently we're very entertaining.
Yeah.
When I knock things onto my own head.
I wish there'd been a camera over here because it was just like, and, I mean, it like
Slow
it
burn.
scissored down like an axe. I mean, it was just going to be like right on the, just bonk on the head.
Oh, what can you do?
Okay, so I'm going to take that out. Good thing I'm fireproof.
That is hilarious.
Okay, I've turned into my grandparent because I have a drawer full of reused tinfoil. That is what it is. Sign of the times. So here is one of the electric Bakur burners. This one is, I think, about $15 at Adder Mist, under 20, and depends on like if they're having a sale or not. And it literally, you just plug it in, and it has a heating element, and this part gets hot, real hot. Don't touch. There are little cups that can go in here, tins that look almost like tiny little cupcake tins. I'm not going to use this one because this is for a different sized burner. But from Adder Mist, you can buy refills of those. But even with those, I strongly, strongly recommend having a little layer of tinfoil because this stuff, when you're burning resins especially, they are ridiculously sticky. They will get all over everything. And if you are burning different types of incense over subsequent batches, you will have some residue left over, and that will change the scent of the next thing that you're burning. So keep that in mind. That still, in fact, has, I was experimenting with a couple of things earlier. Okay. Typically, one does not stick this in here while it's actually hot. So I'm going to be a primate and use a tool. And when you're using your little bit of tin foil for any of this, just make a tiny little cup, because resin-heavy incense like kyphi, as it warms up, is going to melt to some degree, and it will spread out, and you want the tin foil to catch it. This is a perfect time to try the cheap kyphi, which I have in the other room.
Oh yeah,
One
that
moment.
is perfect. Yeah, so when we were making, we were experimenting with recipes to make kyphi at much lower costs. It doesn't smell quite the same in this form right now, but we wanted to try burning it to see if it smells any more like kyphi once it's actually, heating up and
Cured a little
behaving
bit.
like incense. Because there are definitely similarities. Ooh, it sizzles. I hear that sizzle.
I mean, I love and I hate these electric buckhorn burners, because there is no way to control the temperature. They've got one setting and it is hot. I find myself turning them on, letting them get really hot, and then in some cases turning them off so that they stay warm. And as you can probably see, I almost want to, it starts to bubble. And that's really the difference with burning it on one of these as opposed to directly on the charcoal. You'll get smoke on a charcoal, and in the first instance that something like this hits the charcoal, it bubbles and stuff, but it will actually start to burn at a level that carbonizes it. And the reason that's bad is, first of all, we're working with things that are rare and very expensive, and the hotter you burn them, the faster you use them up. You're actually burning them so fast that you aren't getting all of the layers of scent. You're not releasing the resins and the essential oils into the air, the stuff that you're really after. This mass of this incense, it's actually not bad.
Yeah, it's only slowly getting over to me. I want to come over and... Wow, that is way more like kyphi than I would have expected.
If you remember when we first made it, the day we first made it, we tried to burn it. It didn't smell right
so well
at all. But everything we've read says kyphi must cure, and the longer it cures, the better it smells.
It does seem like it's starting to scorch, though.
Yeah, it will.
Like it's behaving much more like a stick of incense than kyphi.
Yeah, the one over there is getting a little too hot, so I'll scoop them out. And to give you an idea, yes, I am fireproof. Don't do that at home. You'll probably get burnt.
Yeah, and one thing that I think, depending on which video you caught before, you might not have seen, we recommend burning very, very tiny pellets, maybe even smaller than that.
Much smaller than that. It's just,
itself.
The one thing with this one is it was really, really hard.
Yeah.
It does not pinch off. Like I can't pinch, like I pretty much have to put it in something and beat it to a pulp to even get these smaller pieces, which is another part about this one that I'm like, eh. So how do you know your kyphi is done burning? It basically turns into kind of an overbaked cookie. It gets hard, and I don't know if you can see, but it's like really dark now on the bottom, so it's started to scorch.
Down a little.
Okay, down a little. I don't know.
Down. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so there's the top part. I don't know how fine a color you get there, but
it pretty much all looks black.
Yeah, well, suffice to say, actually, I think it's easier to see off of this that the bottoms are on the tin foil had started to scorch.
Scorching through the tin foil too.
It will. This one gets really hot. The one with Mermaid Magical Arts, the reason I keep kind of hitting, it's the only electric buckhorn burner I found that has a dial on it that lets you move between 100 degrees and I think 250. But the cheat is if you find a hot plate, which you probably can for the same price, $15 or less, you can almost certainly use a hot plate in the same way as one of these. When we're talking, the ideal burn temperature for kyphi is about 180 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a standard hot plate, and that is probably those little warmers that you get for your coffee mugs. Now they're going to have like a low to a high setting. They probably won't tell you the actual temperature, but those are even cheaper. I've seen those for as low as like $7.99. Things that don't work. The things that they sell, electric or otherwise, to slowly warm wax. Wax has a different melting point, and that has to be incredibly low because what you don't want is your wax to catch on fire. And so it's just a little too low for kyphi. If you are in a pinch, you could in fact heat it over your stove, and you want to do something like that. In that case, absolutely please use some tin foil because you don't want to be scraping this off of your pots for the next 50 years. Also, you don't want the taste that it will inevitably imbue to the food the next several times that you use it. It is safe and non-toxic. Nothing in this is toxic. You could feasibly eat it. I'm just not sure you want to.
I will say it tastes real weird.
Yeah, it's not.
I know now.
It's not awful. It's just really, it's not a flavor profile. One, we're accustomed to, and two, that like, your risotto is going to be happy having mixed in with it.
So I don't know if this is actually what people are asking, but could you talk a little bit about where bakur burners come from? Like, do we know where
a
the
little
burner
bit.
originated?
It's Middle Eastern, and honestly, as near as I can tell, the style of incense that is here, where it is heavy resin with densely packed wood like sandalwood or agar wood, a very different texture and quality and process of making incense, is still in use in the Middle Eastern world, and is very popular. Whereas over on our side of things, if like me, the first incense you probably ever encountered was some variation of Nag Champa. Or if you lived in a really tiny town, the first thing you ever ran into was probably like, I think the company was like Ganesha, and they were like the little black charcoal incense cones. The likeliest place in the 70s and 80s to find incense was a head shop. Like the places that totally weren't selling pipes for smoking marijuana, totally not, but also had a whole wall of incense to cover the smell of the marijuana. You were totally not smoking in the pipes that they were selling or their hookahs. So let's just know which one of these is open. We're used to incense that looks like this. It's a completely different process. I mean, the base ingredients are the same. There's resins in here. There's a lot of scented wood in here, but mostly this is a base on a punk. The stick is called a punk. A base on the punk stick that is meant to smolder. You light the end of it. Let's just do the whole 9 yards. I'll grab that. These are also self-lighting is a word that you'll encounter. It's a little bit different though. Basically, it means when I put some fire to this, fire. I am the great Cornholio.
Oh no. What's
blame,
happening?
No, blame Stephen King. He invoked Beavis and Butthead earlier.
Oh, good.
So if the tip of that is now smoking hot. It is a bright white, or actually red coal at this point. Stuff that is in this incense stick is meant to slowly burn down at that temperature, and it stays burning. It stays smoldering like that. It turns into a coal. the way in which these are made, this smoke, this very act of burning, releases the scent of the incense. The difference with kyphi and bakur, you don't want it to be red hot and burn. Like, that's exactly not the effect you're going for. You want to warm it to release in a more gentle fashion, a richer and deeper, and in many cases, much more expensive mix of oils and woods, resins, and other ingredients. So the incense that we buy in sticks has a base on the punk stick, which is honestly mostly like, oh God, in some places it's actually dung, it's animal dung. That doesn't make it over to the States. Don't worry, your incense isn't animal dung. But if you have ever looked at a cow flop, growing up in Ohio, I have, it's full of just all of this plant matter that is like sort of been broken down and everything. And if you look at the batter that goes on these things that they're dipped into, it's just a whole bunch of inoffensively scented, like the stuff doesn't have a strong scent, and it is usually like wood and like little wood chip stuff. Some incense companies use charcoal instead, like olive wood charcoal, something that doesn't have a strong scent by itself. And in making the paste that this becomes, most of the scent is coming from essential oils and maybe some actual resin, but most of the time you're getting like your resin and stuff, it's second or third hand. Bakur, it is directly the resin, it is directly the actual wood of sandalwood that gives us the scent of sandalwood. It is exactly the wood of aloes wood or agar wood that gives us the scent. Some of that comes down to like mass production issues and how expensive is it to make and resell. This requires a lot less in raw materials for the stuff that actually makes it have a scent. And the difference is this is completely made up of the stuff that has the scent. The carrier here is the fruit, but in this case, the fruit is also a part of the process that is a fixative for the scent. It's not just a base to give you like a chunky fibrous carrier of things. And in bakur, to my limited knowledge of this, there's no fruit base in bakur. It is even more pure. It is just a tight, they look like little bricks, a tightly packed brick of resin and ground wood, often aloes wood, sometimes also known as oud wood, or agar wood, which is really expensive. I was going online with Lyria last night to give her an idea of exactly how much really expensive is.
That was crazy.
Right?
Like, I love trees, but I'm not sure even I love trees that much.
So agar wood is, what was the one? There was one chunk of it up on eBay going for $33,000, and it was about maybe 2 pounds.
Yeah.
2 pounds of wood for over $33,000. It was in the high end of $33,000 too, and that's not unusual. Agar wood, aloes wood, oud wood, whatever you want to call it, is one of the most expensive and precious woods. They've started to grow it in farms and cultivate it, but you know, so I mentioned that myrrh and frankincense, this is resin that comes from trees, and the only way to get the trees to weep this resin is they have to have cuts and scratches down to the sapwood. So basically you're hurting the trees, and it is the tree's response to being wounded that gives you this stuff. Gum mastic the same way. The reason that like there's only one island that it comes from anymore is that's the only place on Earth in this moment where the trees of that particular genus and species are so stressed that they give the gum that is their stress response, that is their response to being in an unideal situation. Agarwood is a tree's immune response to being infected with a fungus. So the tree if you're cultivating it, you can tell that it's cultivated because there is a drill hole where they inject probiotics into these poor trees so they catch a fungal infection and grow the wood that is known as agar wood or aloes wood around the fungal infection. As I'm talking about it, I realize it's basically pearls, tree pearls.
Okay.
It's sort of the same thing. Like, this is a natural response, and the organism is producing something that we find precious and attractive.
And the price fits.
And it is a problem for the thing that's producing it. Let me see. Agar's wood from most of the places that I was looking at, from Vietnam, various points of Southeast Asia. Vietnamese agar wood is known for a much sweeter smell and aroma. I will say that there are many places on Etsy that claim to sell this. Be very cautious, because the prices I saw it going for strongly suggest to me that they are something that has a little bit of it or has been soaked maybe in the essential oil but is not actually this wood. Like many of these things, agar's wood or aloes wood is something that has religious significance for certain cultures. Charms, malas, little statues, votive statues, are carved from this incredibly fragrant, precious wood throughout Buddhist communities. And they are very expensive. They are very precious. One of the things that agar wood or aloes wood or oud wood is attributed with being able to do is it's a protective. I think the way it was translated on one of the Vietnamese pages was basically ghost repellent. But you make a charm out of it, and you put it on or near your baby to keep evil spirits away from them. And you wear it. You have little bits of this carved on your altar. And in addition to being like this rare, precious thing that helps with meditation, helps to still your mind and clear your mind so that you can relax and focus, it also helps to drive away the things and the forces that would otherwise pull you from your path to nirvana as a good Buddhist. Okay, I'm not going to put that back in.
People are saying they like your shirt quite a lot.
It's so perfect for where we're at right now. I mean, I hadn't thought about it when I picked it up, but the world is a vampire.
But not the ethical kind?
No, despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage. Actually, whenever I think Rage Against the Machine, I am peak Gen X. Let's be honest. It is the Rage Against the Machine song in the Crow soundtrack.
Mm-hmm. So folks are asking what types of myrrh and frankincense did we get?
Yeah, let's go back to that.
Yeah.
So is this unplugged?
It is not, but
okay. Let's unplug it so we don't scorch me. You have things more drop on your head.
Thanks so much.
So to cover Bakur burners, Adder Mist, good source for the electric ones. Downside for the cheap electric ones, you don't have any control over how hot they get, and they do get pretty hot. I would say, if you're curious, look up Bakur, Bakhoor, poke around and see. You're going to find a lot of like Persian and Middle Eastern shops all over the place, and don't freak out. Like, there's a lot of really cool stuff to be had there, and a rich, wonderful history. You're going to find Adder Mist, of course, the word attar of roses. Rose is a scent that you will find on a lot of the Bakur. That is, so rose, oud wood, sandalwood, and of course frankincense and myrrh are a significant part of it as well. Anyway, let's move this and let's see what we got. So we have, such a mess. Okay, so as this is getting older, like I will feel, when I first made the kyphi on the cheap, I was like, this is just going to be going in the garbage.
We will never speak of this again.
Yeah, we will never speak of it again. As it ages, I might not feel terrible of like sharing it with people, like putting it up for sale. I will have to figure out like,
Yeah, what is
yeah,
price
it is
point?
definitely not like kyphi
Yeah.
level in any capacity. And the whole point was the
Mhm.
ingredients for this, for specifically this amount, were about $40.
Cool.
So not counting like time, ingenuity, whatever. And probably my bowl is gonna probably shouldn't have grabbed a dinner bowl for it, but I wasn't thinking. Anyhow, it'll come clean eventually. So we have got Arab myrrh, um, some really big chunks of it. This is probably the best like color of myrrh that I'm accustomed to, and it looks really peachy.
It does look really nice.
Yeah. So this is very, very high-end myrrh. It will go into my next, probably my next 2 batches of kyphi, because I need almost a cup of this ground down, which is about
It's gonna
8,
take a while.
which is about 8 ounces. And that's half pound.
Wow.
Yeah, so
It's an exciting bag.
an exciting bag of about $85 worth of myrrh. So, like a lot of things, prices fluctuate for this stuff. We are in the middle of a global pandemic, and I'm going to say that there are certain things that I'm really happy I bought before everything happened, because prices have fluctuated a lot. I remember myrrh not being quite so exorbitant when I first bought it with kyphi last year. It was more like, it was about maybe $1 less an ounce for also Arabian myrrh. But where times they are a changing. So let's look at the frankincense we got. They offered honey hojari. Hojari is like the one of the higher end types of frankincense. You will see black hojari, a couple of, there's one over here. Which is sometimes spelled Hugari. This one is Boswellia sacra from Oman. This was a couple of, this was a free sample from Mermaid Magical Arts. That was the one thing. Their incense burner, the one with the dial, was $70 US, but it came with a stack of these little guys, as well as several little packets of incense to play around with. And this is, you know, nice, clear, high-end, yellow to green. The rarest frankincense currently is clear green. It almost has a peridot color. And that stuff is, I'll be honest with you, I have not bought that stuff. This was a freebie, because I just could not bring myself to pay for an ounce the amount of money that was going for an ounce. Just not that interested. I have my limits. Research will only go so far. So this is their honey hojari. I should. So this.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Yeah. So these are.
And whatever I'm smelling right now
It's
also smells
this
amazing.
one. It's this one here.
Okay.
So like I said, they have different.
Wow.
They have different vintages. So that one, it's honey because it's sweeter.
It smells like pine.
Yeah, pine, sweet.
I love that.
The mahogany gold has a slight sweet but peppery smell to it. If you guys watched me make the kyphi, it was a much darker, almost amber color. There were flecks of the wood from the trees that it had been collected from in it, and that went in our most recent batch of kyphi. And this is honey hojari, which will probably be our future batch. Lighter, definitely a lighter, brighter scent as well.
Mm-hmm.
These are all gathered from the same type of tree, Boswellia, and then just different varieties of Boswellia. Okay, so that's honey hojari. Oh, an escapee. Let me put it back in. And then, and I know that if you want kind of fancy, but also affordable kind of fancy. They had a variety I'd never seen before. Um, Jamani, again, it is Boswellia. Oh, what was the? Instead of Boswellia sacra, it was Boswellia dalzieli. That second word in the scientific name is usually the variety based on where you're harvesting it from. So some of these trees are in Ethiopia, some of them are in the western part of India, Yemen, Oman, the Sudan. And if I remember correctly, this was a further southern African place where it was growing. Oh, this one's pretty. Okay, if you want to go a little crazy with frankincense and buy some higher end stuff, I'm going to recommend going to Wild Tree Essentials and looking up their Jamani, because this is really nice. Here, hun, smell. You love pine anyway, so very, very similar, incredibly similar. Not quite as strong, much more pine.
Where do you keep this when you're not making kyphi again?
I
may need to be
in jars.
I'll just make pilgrimages to the cabinet where it all lives.
Well, also this stuff is so rich in the oils. Like, it's still not like the super high end, but you could just make a little sachet and put it in your sock drawer or put it in your, wherever you want to have everything scented with this. In ancient Egyptian stuff, like this is Horus eye or tears of Horus. So it's the tears that would weep from Horus's wounded eye, and was sacred and kind of woven into the mythos of the contendings of Horus and Set and a bunch of fun things like that.
We've got a couple of interesting magic and occult related questions. You ready to take some of those? Cool. Do you have any tips on how to do magic in a place that doesn't allow candles or incense?
Yes. First, obviously, don't do candles or incense. So when I do rituals at conventions, hotels and convention centers, as it turned out, really don't like candles or incense because they are absolutely against fire code. So one of the first things I started to switch over to is they make some really nice fake candles now. Like, the body is even beeswax, so you get the scent of the candle, and then the light is an LED. They are incredibly sustainable. They still have the feel and the look of a candle, and that sort of like warm golden glow. So look into a couple of LED candles. 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, they were kind of cheesy looking. And the technology has really come to a point where you can have the effect of a candle. It will even look like a candle. It is simply not an open flame. Magically, I will say that there are some benefits, some utility to having flame. Flame is an element. It is representing that element. There are certain spells where you want to invoke more like literal fire, and having live flame is useful. But light is also a type of fire. It's just not living flame. So don't, I think that you can allow for substitutions in the same way that if you were allergic to, I think it was the pine nuts in kyphi, although the pine nuts are in all of the recipes, something that is like that, sunflower seeds. Make the substitutions based on your needs, and the universe will, I'm pretty sure, understand. Incense, instead of something that you are burning, think about, so there's actually really common things where people will put essential oils in little spritzers. So you have like either water as the carrier, or light oil as a carrier. I recommend just a little bit of water and a couple of drops of an essential oil. The one thing with that is, since you are now atomizing this, and the oil is going to atomize into your space, be very aware, like read up on what is this particular scent made out of, what is this essential oil, what does it do, especially with regards to pets and small children. Tea tree oil, less likely to be used in incense or stuff to clean your space. But that one I know off the top of my head is damaging to your pets, your cats especially. They're small, they have very, very reactive livers and kidneys. And kidney damage right now is like the leading cause of death in felines because of a whole variety of reasons. I think it's like 2 out of 3 felines end up developing kidney problems.
That's terrifying.
There's reasons. We won't get into that because that's a whole nother presentation. But the long and the short of it is, be aware of, is this something that may have side effects? Does it say don't use while nursing, don't use while pregnant? If those warnings are there, don't use around an infant where they're going to like breathe it in. So on one hand, atomizing into a little spritzer bottle can help you put the scent into the space, and comes with a whole extra level, its own level of concerns and considerations. Another thing is if you buy the higher end frankincense, myrrh, copal, many of these things don't need to be burned to have the scent like everywhere for the next 15 to 30 days. Like this stuff has a scent that comes off of it and wafts gently off of it. Warming it again on a hot plate or over your stove, you are not catching it on fire. Most of those places that prescribe against having incense, what they don't want is the smoke, and they don't want the spark. You saw with, our traditional here in the States, Western incense, there is a hot coal on the tip of this when it's burning. And if that hot coal falls off, as sometimes it will, and falls onto a flammable surface, you now have you have a fire hazard. This is a fire hazard. This slowly simmering over a heat source that is controllable, like a hot plate or even your stove, is not. It is not going to catch on fire. It may smoke if you have it up hotter, but if you have it very low, like 150 degrees, it's just going to slowly release the smell with very, very little smoke. And that's also one of the benefits for folks who are asthmatic. If you have a problem with smoke, this sort of incense, these older types of incense, are less about the smoke, more about the smell. And while you can burn them hot enough to get some nice smoke going, if that is fuming the space is one of the things you want to do, if your purpose is the scent, very, very low settings on low burners, so nothing is on fire. It is just slowly warming up and cooking to release all of the oils and resinoids and things that make this stuff fantastic. I'm going to retrieve the piece that's on the floor.
Lovely.
I'm going to also wash off the dust
of our many, many cats.
Well, no, it's the frankincense, the myrrh, like my hands are powdered with it.
It doesn't sound like a downside.
It's sticky. Well, actually tacky. Frankincense dust, in the same way that they sell like pine as rosin for like if you're climbing ropes or if you're doing any kind of gymnastics, actually any sports, dancing, you use rosin so you don't slip.
Yeah.
And it has that same effect. Like it's a tree resin. It is not a pine exactly, but it's very piney. Mastic is the same way. Like it's not a pine. It's actually coming from lenticulus pistachius. So I think a relative of pistachios. And still the sap has a very piney smell to it.
Oh. Ready for another question?
Sure.
What do you think of the work that occultists are doing nowadays? The question specifically referenced E.A. Kevin, but I know that people like Damien Eccles and many other folks that we know are also doing a ton of work.
So, I mean, one of my favorite periods of history to study when I first started on this path was the tail end of the 1800s, the occult revival in Victorian England. And there were a number of socio-political things that went into why that happened. One of them being you had this sort of like dominant, very, well, Victorian culture, like don't expose your ankles, that might be too much, like incredibly oppressive and repressive culture, a lot of political stuff going on in the world, and people sort of rebelled against that in several different directions, and the occult revival was part of that rebellion, was part of the push against British colonialism, British magic as resistance. So here, flash forward 100 years and some change, and we're at this fascinating time where there is another occult revival.
Can you back up and say a little bit more about, repeat basically the bit about the spirit of Yeats? So I had briefly taken the kyphi out of the stream,
Okay.
not realizing that would mean that sound went out.
Oh no.
So for only about, I think, 20 to 30 seconds.
Oh God. Okay.
That was all my fault. I am so sorry.
All right.
Now I know not to do that.
Don't do that. That's where the microphone's hooked in, because the microphone thinks that my iPhone is a set of headphones, and I can't convince it otherwise.
Yeah.
Like I just can't.
Yeah, that's why it fell on my head before.
Yeah.
Is it's connected to headphones that are leaning on all the anyway.
Yeah, this is a very interesting arrangement. It works, but
it's fun.
It takes ingenuity.
Special.
Okay, so poet W.B. Yeats, if you don't know who he is, you have heard his work. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. The blood-dimmed tide is loose, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. It's one of the most quoted poetic works in English, and especially apocalyptic works in English. You'll see it at like the opening of a billion and one different things. So Yeats, who, despite one of my professors at John Carroll, bless her heart, but her specialty was Yeats, and she had no idea the man was an occultist.
Wow.
He ran organizations. Like the end of his life was spent working with his wife as a medium and having her channel stuff. I mean, like he was known among his compatriots for his fascination with summoning demons and diabolism, and the way he was and I like wanted to beat her over the head with his book on tarot and just say, just start here. Like, anyhow, I get a little passionate about accuracy in history. So W.B. Yeats, really big occultist, also really big Irish guy, at a time when there were still some tensions between England and Ireland. And in this occult revival, one of the things that he aimed to do with the Irish revolutionary Maud Gonne, who he really wanted to get it on with, but she was just like, William, please no. Just, I love you like a brother. Just no. Eventually he got the message. What they wanted to do, and you can find this in the letters that he was exchanging with Maud. He had the idea to go to some of the sacred sites in Ireland and enact rituals to call to life and awareness, to bring out of slumber the very spirit of the land itself, to basically invoke the egregore of Ireland to throw off British rule. So to go and have a ritual for rebellion, for resistance, to use magic to resist against what was problematic and perceived as oppressive system. So flash forward to where we're at right now. We are at another occult revival. Uh, and there are various ways. Actually, let me go back all the way back to sort of the roots of Western magic and Western occultism, as far back as we can go to what influenced that. Magic, although it fits in the same place that religion occupies, the otherworldly, the realms of spirits and the gods, and everything else that's in between, the spaces beyond the physical and the mundane. Religion traditionally has been the organized and sanctioned monolithic edifice where society says, these are the people who are trained to do this, who are allowed to do this. Here are the boundaries within which they are allowed to do it. And here are the boundaries where that is something that benefits our society, our political structure, and that's religion. Magic traditionally has been where people take those talking to the gods, having visions, invoking prophecy, trying to talk to spirits, working with the dead, outside of where it's sanctioned, outside of where it's politicized or at least politically controlled by the dominant and accepted group. It's usually people who are not part of the clergy, they're not part of the priesthood, they have not been trained within this structure, or if they were, they have stepped outside of it in order to practice in a subversive or a rebellious way. Sometimes that subversion and rebellion is no more than simply doing it for themselves, as opposed to doing it for the benefit of a community. It varies from culture to culture, but magic takes all of the tools and goals of religion, puts it in the hands of an individual, and that very act of removing it from a sanctioned space is rebellion. So rebellion, resistance, subversive behavior is at the very root of magic. So it's no surprise, it should be no surprise that many of the people who are like really delving into occultism and magic and witchcraft right now are using it to empower themselves when they are in a position of powerlessness, are using it to empower themselves to work against something that is trying to take their power away. Damien Eccles is a fantastic example of someone who was imprisoned for 20 years on death row, imprisoned with his life in the balance, usually put in solitary confinement, all of his power taken away. And so through magic, he reclaimed all of that for himself. Because the dominant society, every aspect of that society, every way in which that was put together, said he could not have power anymore, to the very point where he must be all by himself in a cell. And it was okay if he was wounded, sick, dying, because he was supposed to die anyway. Society had determined that that was what, he was a worthless being. Not merely worthless, but actually like so execrable that he had been sentenced to death. And so he took back his identity and his power through his magic. And he's hardly the only one who does that. His case is an extreme one, and obviously I'm getting very impassioned as my words like bubble out over on top of themselves.
So magic cuts out the middleman of having to use a priest?
Yes. Or having to seek approval for what you're doing, which is why in the magic of Western Europe particularly, because I can speak to that, having worked on the stuff for the Dictionary of Demons, the grimoire tradition or the Solomonic tradition. It comes down to, as we know it, as ceremonial magic. It is a lettered magic, and that is significant. It is stuff that is written in books. Think about what you may know from history books of the 12th, the 13th, the 14th centuries in Europe. How many people could read? How many people actually had access to books and to the education necessary both to read and to write? Frequently, clergy were some of the only ones who had that. Higher level in the class of society. Lawyers, weirdly, also. And it's notable that there's this sort of like whole underground of angel-obsessed lawyers who've got some texts like the Goetia of Dr. Rudd and some other things to look into from Golden Horde Press. But a lot of the early ceremonial magic books, really like a core of that movement, many of the people practicing it were clergy who were practicing outside of the bounds of what was accepted religion. They took the education and they sort of went in their own little direction. I've got many thoughts on that, but
yeah. Apparently, someone has a minor in Irish studies, had studied Yeats, and also had no idea about the connection to the occult. It sounds like it's just being erased from history.
No, that's. This is one of the things that made me realize that I would never cut it as a professor. I cannot stand that erasure. And not just the erasure from the occult. Like, we straight wash, we whitewash, and we Christian wash so much of our history that we lose the context of many of these people and their choices and their art. Simply in studying what a person creatively makes. Yeats's poetry doesn't make sense. It doesn't make the same sense it does. If you look at him as a good Irish Catholic, because he was an occultist. He was an occultist who believed in communication from the spirit world. He was absolutely influenced by his Irish culture, by the Catholicism that was woven throughout that culture, but a lot of his stuff was a push against it. His poem, The Two Trees, is about the tree of life and the clipfoth. It is a poem of United Kingdom versions of Kabbalism. You know that one. Lorena McKenna does a wonderful song of it. Beloved, gaze into thine own heart. The holy tree is sheltering there. From joy the holy branches start. And look it up. It's a wonderful song version of this very powerful poem that talks about the tree of life and its dark reflection, known as the clipfoth in Kabbalism as it is practiced by, because I want to be very, very clear that the Victorian occult movement and the Kabbalism that they created and interpreted is quite different from Jewish Kabbalism as it is practiced by Jews. In much the same way that if you've been attending any of the classes, or the first class on like the energy body and healing with energy, and we'll get into it this Saturday a lot, what we understand of like chakras and the energy body as it has come to us in our culture now, also from that revival in the 19th century, is not quite like what you would expect and what you will find in Hindu tradition. It is a Western interpretation of it. There are parts that are left behind, parts that are intentionally removed, and parts that are simply misinterpreted. Probably the biggest legacy of that is misunderstanding what karma is. To the point where now, for our modern movements, karma has its own meaning. It has evolved for us, but it's not what it started out as. Karma is not you do bad and you get bad, you do good and you get good. It's not as dualistic as that.
So there are a couple of interesting questions, one building on the other. Is all magic dark magic? And also clarifying what is dark magic from someone else.
Oh, is all magic dark magic? No. Magic is really okay.
Real
magic
talk.
Yeah, real talk. Magic is one word that we use to describe the human act of asserting will and intent to shape or alter things internally or externally. We may also call it energy work. We may also call that prayer. It also falls into a whole number of different paranormal abilities. Magic is one word for that. And there are different ways in which you access that ability and channel that ability depending on which of the modalities you're working in. If you're working in ceremonial magic, you are harnessing your will to change things, to reach out and call things into your life through an incredibly complicated system that relies on time of day and a lot of astrological stuff, a lot of skill work, a lot of incredibly ritualized and organized daily practice. You have to craft certain things for your tools. You have to wear certain things. You have to observe purity up to and including celibacy for certain of the things. So each of the different approaches gives you a different structure through which you are channeling, focusing, and harnessing these abilities. The raw ability of a human being to exert their will, to have an intention that shapes something on their interior world or something that influences into the world around us. Honestly, I think that's just being human. We have it interpreted in a lot of different ways. It's magic, it's mysticism, it's religion, it's psychicism, it's energy work. And thinking that one is dark or evil and one is white and therefore, I don't know, pure, more redeemable is, again, dualism crept into our Western worldview. Oh, let's see, even before. So there's Judaism and Zoroastrian stuff started happening in Persia, and Christian stuff started to happen when Messianic Judaism came about, and you had the insertion of in ancient Persia, there's a religion founded by Zoroaster, and in their mythology, there was basically a Lord of Light and a Lord of Darkness, and they existed in a kind of perpetual battle. And everything that was going on in the world, I'm super simplifying it, came down to the fight between light and darkness. Notably, it grows out of a fire worshiping tradition that still has roots over there. But that idea of light versus darkness, good versus evil, crept into Judaism and Christianity and sort of polarized things that had been a little bit less stark. Where we are now, thousands of years after all of this became like the key mythological prospect that we were allowed to indulge in as a society, now we are left with a world that has no shades of gray. Not for magic, not for personal choice, not for anything. Certainly not for religion. You're either damned or you're redeemed. And that leads to the belief that you get one shot, you go to hell or you go to heaven, and there's really like no in between. And trying to figure out like what's light and what's dark. And when we apply it to magic, it gets really problematic. I mean, think about it. When I was first studying magic, witchcraft, and Wicca back at the late 80s and early 90s, it was presented to me that dark or black magic was anything you did for yourself. And so technically, to do a spell to get yourself a good job would be black magic because it's selfish, because you're using magic to help yourself. Does that make any damn sense? Because it didn't make any sense to me. Now, in a broader view, people will say, all right, well, casting magic to hurt people Is that black magic? Bad magic, I have a hard time like wanting to say black or white or gray, because casting to harm someone, all right, what if it's someone who hurt you? What if it's someone who is actively harming people right now? And what you are doing is casting something to get them to stop. Does that make it good?
It's not what they want, but what
Or
they
bad?
want is clearly not
Yeah.
good either.
So I have a hard time with black or white. I have a lot more investment in ethics in terms of what are the results of your actions, being aware of like, if I do this, what is it doing? And how selfish is it? To me, if I had to actually define what is evil, to me, evil is acting in a selfish way where you are absolutely improving things for yourself with full knowledge that it's harming someone else.
So it's not just taking away your headache.
Yeah.
It's like trying to shove that into somebody else.
Yeah.
And hitting them on the head if it doesn't work.
And honestly, there's a whole lot of things that I consider purely evil that have been very normalized in our society as totally okay. So again, I have different opinions and a very different philosophy, but to me, evil is not just acting in a selfish way. I think everybody, to some extent, is going to be, I mean, you should be looking out for yourself. You should be looking out for the people that you care about. Are you enriching yourself while you also are fully aware that in order to take this, I had to pull it out of somebody else's hand who needed it more than me? To me, that's evil.
Can you talk a tiny bit about Satanism?
Okay, let me drink a little bit here.
Yeah. Because I know that often gets a bad rap as like, oh, this is all dark magic.
Well, and to be fair, the folks who were founding most of the satanic groups in the 60s and 70s kind of built up that image. Mm-hmm. LaVeyan Satanism, founded by Anton Szandor LaVey, is probably the Satanism most people are familiar with. There's a whole lot to understand about this, but the simplest thing that I can explain is LaVeyan Satanism was a reaction against strict Christian society, specifically a society where the separation of church and state really was just lip service, where you were, if you lived in the United States, you were pretty much expected to be Christian and uphold Christian values, and he didn't like that very much. He also really wanted to buck against the idea of living this life with the intent of suffering and making sacrifices because you're going to be rewarded afterwards. In a lot of ways, it's closer to atheism because LaVeyan Satanism doesn't really account for, like, you have this life. It's more a philosophy of value yourself and value what you want and work toward what you want, work toward improving yourself and your position. And stop letting people who believe that there's some sky daddy looking over you telling you that you need to feel guilty because you ate a brownie. And again, that is super simplified. A slightly more eloquent way is, in my opinion, LaVeyan Satanism takes the philosophy of the Marquis de Sade, if you are familiar with that fellow, to kind of its logical conclusion and turning it into a religious system. LaVeyan Satanism notably was so not spiritual that it gave rise to a couple of groups that wanted to work with antinomian deities, deities who are, think of them as Byronic heroes of gods and goddesses. They're the bad boys. Set is a big one because that one broke off in the 70s from the Church of Satan and became the Temple of Set, which is a little bit more spiritual, certainly believes in like the objective reality of the powers that they're working with, and still is approaching Satanism more in the sense of these antinomian deities are Luciferian in the sense of like the romantic poet's version of Lucifer, as a rebel, as someone who is pushing against things, as a light bringer, as a knowledge bringer, as a Promethean figure. And that is more likely what you are going to encounter if you dig past the veneer of ooga booga in a lot of the satanic stuff. There's another satanic group that has come to light in the past decade or so. They were the ones that were doing the Black Mass at Harvard maybe 10 years ago. They're the ones responsible for putting Baphomet alongside the Ten Commandments, and they are much more a political movement in the spirit of Anton Szandor LaVey, pushing against specifically American culture, where we say that there is a separation of church and state. But what they really mean when they say freedom of religion, certainly what they enforce, is different types of Christianity are okay. And anything that's not that does not get the same protection for freedom of religion in the country, especially if it's fringy. But to be honest, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Baha'i, Sikhism, all of these are not given the same treatment.
Just ask yourself how many Jewish holidays are observed on a national level.
Yeah.
0.
Yeah. How many town squares have a menorah in them?
Yep.
So
there's that.
And so that branch of Satanism is very much about changing people's attitudes about what is permitted, what does freedom of religion actually mean, and they are very much a political movement. They did break off from the Church of Satan. There's some politics there. There's a lot. I recommend looking into the work of Dr. Joseph Laycock, spelled exactly how you'd think, Laycock. Fantastic intellectual. I love his work, and he's been doing a lot of work on that particular branch of Satanism. I will also say that there are some people who practice what is called theistic Satanism. I did an interview with Patheos Pagan most recently, and this came up. And I'm going to admit my ignorance in this case, in the sense that I just can't wrap my head around it. Theistic Satanism is a small number of people who believe in Satan as an objective, real entity, as in the big bad who stands in opposition to God, and that's their guy. And I can't quite wrap my head around why that seems like a good idea. And I don't want to seem dismissive of somebody's beliefs, but I will say of all of the takes on Satanism, that one just sort of leaves me going, but I don't get it. And I've talked with some theistic Satanists, and it just, I don't get it. But at the same time, I don't get a lot of other religion, much more accepted ones, that tell people that because your genitals are shaped a certain way, you have to dress a certain way, or you have to do a certain thing, or you can't go out in public without like a male relative following you around, or like you have to grow up and have babies and that's your whole purpose. And I'm not picking on any one. There's a whole bunch of religions that are very restrictive about like who you are and what you're allowed to do. And when it comes down to it, my idea with religion, there's a couple of things that I think religion should never do. Actually, put it in my box of these are kind of evil. I don't think any religious system should force its particular view on the world or reality onto other people. And actually mandating in that religion that it is your responsibility, your very purpose, to convert people to your belief system. I think that that's evil. I think that defeats the whole purpose of belief. I don't like that at all. And I'm probably pissing off anybody who is evangelical, because that's exactly what that word means, to evangelize, to go out and spread the good word, i.e. force people to become and agree with the way you believe. To me, belief should be an incredibly personal journey. It is a dialogue between you and whatever you perceive in the world as divine or meaningful. Anyway, so evangelizing, bad. Using religion as an excuse, as a reason to prevent people from pursuing their lives as they want to pursue them. But within the limits of, I'm not talking about like we should all have the freedom to go bonk one another on the head with a machete. Like that's, but to simply like live and choose, this is who I want to love. This is how I want to live. This is the color I want to wear my hair. I want to be able to shave once in a while. Like things that these choices do not hurt anyone. And yet there are religions that will try to determine to you, if you are a good believer, Sky Daddy will punish you and spank you over the bum if you are tattooed, or if you are pierced, or if you kissed a girl. Anyway, I've got some opinions on that.
I think I'm just going to ask one more question.
Okay, good, because I'm just getting into a
You're
tear at this
getting
point.
passionate now.
Feisty today.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, if someone has wronged you, is using magic to get back at them okay or not okay?
So, again, the question is if someone has wronged you, is using magic to get back at them okay or not okay? What I have learned from my own practice, sometimes I perceive a wrong where the person did not intend one. And so I have found that it's not a good idea to use magic to simply lash out in revenge based on my perceptions. I do something that I think other people would think of as a curse. I certainly think of it as a curse. It certainly fulfills the same impulse for me. It's real simple. May you get what you truly deserve. The wording is very important. The intent is very important. It allows for the fact that there's a lot of feel there. There's a lot of energy there in terms of what our interaction just was. And I may not know the whole story, and I may not completely understand what that interaction was in the moment that I have that reaction. And so I feel compelled sometimes to just get it out of my system. And so may you get what you truly deserve. That leaves it in the hands of powers greater than I that might have a better perspective. That said, I do know people who practice hexing and cursing. And I will say that there are certainly some instances where less of a curse and more of a binding. It might for some people seem like a minor, like a linguistic difference, but I don't think it is. So when we are protecting ourselves, I talk about grounding, centering, and shielding. What do you do with someone who can't protect themselves from a negative situation, or from someone who is doing something negative to them, somebody who's sending bad magic or intent at them, somebody who's surrounding them with a lot of unpleasant emotional stuff, whether it's human or otherwise? To put it in very clear terms, what do you do if a child who can't be expected to protect themselves is in a situation where they are being harmed by someone's energetically by someone, psychically by someone, by emotional stuff that they're just picking up in that space from a really negative person? They can't necessarily shield themselves. So you either shield and protect the child, or if this is a person with full knowledge that they're doing stuff to harm people around them, you shield them. Not to protect them from things around them, but to keep what they're doing. Just let it just be them. And some people may think of that as a binding. It's incredibly, it's a lot more time and energy consuming than you would think. It's not something you just do and it sits like that. Like you have to keep up on it. But there are a few instances that I can think of where I would have no compunction focusing on a person and trying to like reduce the harm that they are able to put into the world and keep that just in their own little sphere, minimize their effect. Again, with the knowledge that I may be misjudging them, But let's be honest, occasionally there's no pretending that a person isn't doing horrible shit. So rather than casting a curse of like, may you fall down the stairs, or may, like, whatever, something of like, may you stop hurting people. May all of your negativity stay only with you. That's more of what I personally find acceptable and appropriate.
Cool. Thank you all so much for being here and for hanging out with the unboxing of all the amazingly delicious myrrh.
The myrrh, this.
It's amazingly good smelling stuff.
Yeah, just right through there.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll smell it again. Twist my arm. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That is astounding. Do we have, will pre-orders be available by this Friday?
Yeah, I think let's aim for this
Okay.
Friday for
Cool.
pre-orders.
We will have kyphi pre-orders available on the website by Friday. And yeah.
And I'm honestly already thinking about starting another batch.
Yeah.
Because I want to play around with a couple of substitutions, adding a few different things.
Well, and you've been talking about it, like basically talking about kyphi batches as different vintages of wine.
Yeah.
Or different vintages of kyphi in this case, since there is wine in them. But
yeah.
That won't be what changes most likely.
Yeah. So basically making different vintages that would be like, here's the one that I made at this time, and its ingredient list, and kind of going on. I kind of want to play with one that has mainly raisins as the fruit base, but has a small amount of dates, or integrates a little bit of date syrup instead of along with the honey, to get some of, because there is a rich sweetness to the original one from last year that the current one has, but not quite so pungently. So I want to play around with that, play around with a couple of the ingredients, and the way of making kyphi, that base of fruit and wine and honey, that's referenced, that type of incense is not exclusive to kyphi, like that base. Kyphi is the incense that is made with that base that has a certain set of ingredients to it, but multiple other varieties of incense also used a fruit and wine and honey base. So I am continuing my research in things like the Demotic papyrus, the Greek and Roman magical papyri from the Hellenic area, as well as a couple of things that may have developed from them, and finding where instances of this style of incense crept into specifically the Western magical tradition as incense that was used to summon spirits, as incense that was used to help facilitate actually communicating with the dead specifically. There's a couple of necromantic versions.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
this is going to be fun to
like playing around with the variations. The one thing that is holding me up on the current one I want to play with is two of the ingredients are very rare, one of which is aloes wood or agar wood. So that's why I ended up buying that like $45, like it's probably going to be about this big, like just ground that is made in one of the it's like the it's not natural pearl, but yeah, anyway, so I have many things planned, and thank you for hanging out for a little while, and now I get to clean up my kitchen.
Have a great night, everybody. Bye.